Well, they did it. It's been exactly 1 year since the previous installment in the Poppy Playtime series, and already we have a whole new chapter out and ready for us to sink our teeth into. And honestly, I say good. The wait for Chapter 3 was actually unbearable, and for the longest time I was totally expecting another century to go by before we got any relevant Poppy news. But I was quickly proven wrong, with the actual game ending up releasing surprisingly quickly. I mean, I'm sure one of the main factors that led to a much heavier push for Chapter 4 was the neglect towards Mob's other children. Yes, Project Playtime, I'm looking at you. But I've seen a lot of people actually get a bit upset because of this swift release and claim the game seemed rushed or unpolished. I remember seeing these kind of comments everywhere before even playing the game myself, and it honestly had me worried a little. Really? My Poppy Playtime rushed? Eventually I finally found time to sit down and actually play the game myself, and I have to say, y'all are a bunch of fun-hating vampires trying to suck the joy out of people like me, because this game is peak! Jokes aside, I do actually understand why a lot of people have a problem with this chapter, and I get why a lot of people are upset. Heck, I even have some remarks I'd like to share. But I feel like some people need to pay more attention to the actual positives and genuinely great things this chapter achieves, so they can see how peak this masterpiece really is. I'll be giving my opinions on basically every section of this game, and I'll talk about whether I thought they were good or bad, and if so, why I thought that way, so that hopefully, even though I thought this game was really solid, we see even more improvement from the developers in the future. Ultimately, I really just want to rant about a lot of things in general, and breaking everything up into good and bad sections helps me ramble on without actually being coherent, so yeah, let's get popping this playtime. The first positive aspect of this chapter I really want to get the chance to praise is actually all the new kinds of gameplay we see this time around, because there was a surprising amount of variety going on, which I think is a very welcome change. But before I get into all of that, I gotta admit, it's kind of shocking to see barely any of those power pole puzzles present in this installment. That was a tongue twister. There's only like 2 of them in the entire game, and even then, these things are simpler than ever, especially when you compare them to those in Chapter 1. This is just such a weird change to me, because I always saw these things as what made Poppy stand out in a way. It was its unique gameplay gimmick other than the actual hands themselves, and they used to be all over the place in previous chapters. But it seems like Ma wants to start trying new things. Now, to be clear, none of this is actually a bad thing at all, and like I said earlier, I'm happy to see more variety going on in the gameplay department of Poppy. Heck, you can even see this drastic change as more positive improvement for the series, since not many people even cared for those kind of sections. But other than horror sequences, those are the only other main gameplay sections present in a lot of the chapters. So to get rid of all of that, you have to make sure to fill up that space with content that's just as fun, if not better. So, do they successfully accomplish that? Yes! This game introduces so many new ideas for gameplay sections that I think all have so much potential if expanded onto in the future. But some of my favorite sections I want to mention were the Red Smoke Maze and the Escape Room-esque sections, because they are so cool. Let's start with those escape room type sections, because although they can be a little confusing at first, they do show up quite a couple times in the chapter and are actually, in my opinion, fun, intense moments of gameplay that require some genuine problem solving to get out of, which I enjoy. They're exactly what they sound like. You get locked in a room and you have to uncover some strange way to get out before it fills up with gas or you freeze to death. But just their inclusion alone holds so much promise for me. I like the way these things make me think, and I genuinely would like to see how their concept gets expanded on further in later chapters. But bro, this smoke maze is actually peak. During one of the more major sections of the game, you'll find yourself trapped in a giant maze-like area that's filled with the red smoke we've seen a lot of from Chapter 3. And unfortunately, all we have to aid ourselves with is just a random broken down gas mask to keep our player from going insane. Though, due to its age, it's not the best in quality, and isn't any good at actually containing oxygen too well. So, as we wander around this environment, collecting resources and progressing forward, we have to try our best to be cautious about not letting its number go too far down, and make sure to refill our air whenever we get to a safe zone. This is such a simple little section of gameplay that I'm sure has been done plenty of times before. But once again, it's little sections like this where I see something new being done for the series, and I just can't help but love it. Plus, I haven't even mentioned the haunting sounds you hear while you're doing all this. Due to the mask you wear being not the best, you do start tripping a little bit when you're in the maze, of course, but specifically when you're near a dead toy, in which then you can all of a sudden hear the conversations going on between scientists and children who are being experimented on. This revelation is just so chilling to me, and it's such a genius use of the red smoke to apply more storytelling. But it also benefits this section gameplay wise too, because you can actually use the voices as a tool to locate the toys within the maze even faster, due to them getting louder and louder the closer you get to them. Already, I love these small short sections of gameplay that we're getting, and I hope this is proof that Mob is experimenting more with gameplay, because this is peak. Now, a bunch of the sections of the game I just mentioned were all basically sections of downtime before the real content. Sure, they can be intense and even pretty story relevant, but at the end of the day, they're all just the basic filler before the real meat and bones of the chapter. So, what kind of scenarios do we actually find ourselves in that actually involve a lot of horror and the threat of a monster ripping our head clean off? Oh, I like this. Now, personally, I don't know how to feel about Yarnaby. On one hand, I absolutely love his design, and his gameplay section in No Man's Land is actually really fun in my opinion. But on the other hand, the first section he's in is really weird, he kinda dies pretty pathetically, and in general, I feel like he was heavily underused. For context, who is Yarnaby, and why are we faced up against him? Well, that would be because of Dr. Harley Sawyer, or just the Doctor. You see, he's been watching us throughout the entire series so far, and when we finally meet him in the prison for the first time, he decides to test us a little bit. Knowing we've managed to survive and even fight back against many dangerous foes, he decides to put us up against his very own personal guard dog, Yarnaby, who is a much more violent and chaotic creature than what we've seen before. Now, when we first meet Yarnaby, we get this really out of place stealth section of the game that's kind of just alright, and afterwards it's like literally the shortest chase sequence in the history of horror games, so I don't know why any of this was added. Luckily though, this guy gets a much bigger chance to shine later in the chapter when he follows us into No Man's Land, aka an electrician's nightmare. I see a lot of people really annoyed with this section for a multitude of reasons. It's not really obvious what you're doing, this place is a total mess of a maze, and on release, I'm pretty sure it had a butt ton of bugs with it. But when I got to this section when I was playing, I had a blast. It was super unfair and totally baloney at first, but over time I started to understand a lot more on how to better evade Yarnaby's detection, and finding ways to maneuver around him without getting chomped was surprisingly fun. Don't get me wrong, it was still super hard and it had me clenching my cheeks each time I turned a corner, but it was just so fun, and I was enjoying my time with Yarnaby. I can't wait to see how else he's used. Oh wait, he's dead. Dang. That was fast. This is kind of why I'm so conflicted with Yarnaby. I like this character and he seems like he has so much potential, but he kind of just dies off right when things were getting good, and it's not even something we do ourselves. Though, I can't complain too much because if you really think about it, he really is just a side character in the grand scheme of things. Basically just another Mr. Light, but just the way he was teased really made me think he'd have a bigger role. I mean, he was one of the main focuses in Chapter 4's ARG and was even the first ever monster to get shown off other than the nightmare critters, so I can't help but feel like I've been bamboozled a little bit. Speaking of the nightmare critters though, they did not need to exist, like, at all. And honestly, I kinda hate the fact that they exist. They quite literally could have just been smiling critters again. I mean, they even reused the mini huggies from Chapter 2, so what stopped them from just using smiling critters more? As far as I know, they don't even try and bother to explain why the nightmare critters exist. And they really are just recolors of the smiling critters. So actually, why do they exist? Why are they here? Once again, for context, the nightmare critters are even more toys that are put up against us by the Doctor, and these guys actually show up quite a bit in the game. Unfortunately though, they're annoying, and make up most of the worst sections of this game in my opinion. Like I said before, I actually really do adore a lot of aspects of this game's gameplay this time around, because a lot of it is fun and unique. However, every section using these guys is somehow something we've already seen before, but worse, or just extremely frustrating. And there's two parts in particular I really just want to rant about already. First of all, they bring back the concept from the Playhouse in Chapter 3 where there's a bunch of little guys running around that you gotta shoot to keep them off you. And that alone isn't a bad thing, and when I saw it in the trailer I was actually pretty excited because I actually liked those sections in Chapter 3. But honestly, it's not as good here, especially in the prison fight. The critters can now jump at you, which gives them a huge unfair advantage. They don't give you anywhere to run like the maze from the Playhouse did, and they spawn like a billion of them all at once, so they just start swarming you. The only positive I guess I could say about this section is I'm happy they don't one-shot you anymore, because if they did, this part would be absolutely nightmarish. But it gets worse when you take into account that this section is timed, and you're not actually doing anything to progress. You just have to sit there and wait, defending yourself from these monsters, until Harley decides you're good now, you're good. Why? Why was this added? It's just not really fun, and honestly, it just reminds me of that infamous wave battle from Bendy Chapter 5 that no one likes. No hate to Bendy, of course, I'm just trying to make an example. But if you thought that section was bad, you don't even know. There's a section of this game that literally irks me to my core. And that's the giant Baba Chop section. I feel like everyone I watch play this game hates this section, and that's fair because it's just so broken. This dude is way too fast, can jump way too far, and like, dude, who thought this was fair? I'm not joking, there are times where I literally stood still for just a second, literally just a second, to grab a battery, and all of a sudden this dude shows up, out of nowhere, and starts violating me all of a sudden. Like, bro, back up! Stop spraying me with your green gooey stuff. What even is that? This section is just inherently flawed. I mean, I see what they're going for on paper, avoid the monster and grab the batteries to proceed forward, but in practice, it really is just a run in a circle simulator until Baba Chops loses interest and you can actually do something. I'm just a little disappointed by that, but luckily, those are the only parts of the game I really have a major problem with, gameplay-wise of course. Everything else is still pretty fun.
Dear God, my precious boy, what have you become? A mere butt of a joke? Simply to exist as fodder to the common folk, only to be cast aside and banished by those who created you? You were made for greatness. You never deserved this punishment. You will be avenged, Pianosaurus.
Yeah, Pianosaurus just upsets me. You're telling me this beautiful gem of a creature wasn't good enough, but yeah, let's make an entire section about this sheep character that no one cares about. Guys, come back, I swear I like this game. Mom needs to bring him back somehow, whether that's by introducing another bigger body of him or just putting him in Project Playtime. Either way, he needs more screen time because he's just way too cool not to get any. Also, side note, I feel really stupid because in my video where I watched the final trailer for the game, I genuinely thought we were gonna get like a boss fight between us and Pianosaurus somewhere in the chapter. And bro, it's crazy how wrong I was. Like, I was dead wrong. Why even hype him up? Like, why was he put in the ARG? It's like they wanted to upset us. I don't know. Anyways, let's get back to talking about the positives of this game, because there's so much more going on that I really appreciate. Like, for example, Dr. Harley Sawyer himself, the very man putting us up against all these new foes. Ever since his introduction in the series, I've always loved Harley as a character. He's basically the William Afton of the series, and I genuinely adore everything he's been used for. His character is so twisted and cruel, yet so intelligent and cunning, and the impact he has story-wise for this series is genuinely fascinating. So, when it was revealed he would be making his first proper appearance in the game as this computerized shell of his former self, I was ecstatic. And guess what? They knocked it out of the park with his character. Before this chapter, all we had to go off of to gauge what kind of person this guy was through audio logs and various tapes, but this game gives him so much time in the spotlight, and in my opinion, perfectly adapts the character as such a great scummy villain. He watches us constantly throughout the entire chapter, and he plays with us like we're another one of his silly experiments. He enjoys mocking our motives and finds entertainment in digging underneath our skin, wondering if we'll ever actually crack under the pressure. And it's genuinely so cool. One by one, we pick off the threats he puts in our way, and eventually we start picking away at him too, calling us and our allies out on our hypocrisy and examining how far we're willing to go, until we finally get confronted with the Doctor himself and... Oh, wait, he's already dead? Really? It was that simple? Okay. Yeah, although I still love the Doctor as a character, and I actually do adore the idea behind his boss fight, having to run around this big dark maze with a bunch of mannequins you don't know are active or not, but I just feel like it's just a little too easy. I mean, it's pretty obvious which ones are the alive ones, and even then, they're super slow and unthreatening, so you can just like walk on past them if you really feel like it. It's a little underwhelming, and I wish, other than making it harder, there was something else we had to do to kill this guy off, because he genuinely was such a cool and interesting antagonist, and it all just kinda ended right when things were getting good. Like I said earlier, that's really just a theme of this chapter. Things ending too soon and leaving me wanting more. But in the grand scheme of things, these characters, Yarnaby, the Doctor, and my poor boy Pianosaurus, they really are just side characters, and although they were teased up a lot, which, come on Mob, you were setting yourself up for failure when you did that, they weren't the main focus in the first place. No. That would go to...
Doey the Dough Man!
He scratch you, he scum you, he squish you, he spun you. D-O-E-Y. He's silly, he's goo you, he's sticky, he's glue you. D-O-E-Y.
Look at all the colors.
So many toys and one. Triple tap the friend and triple tap the fun. D-O-E-Y. Love until the day that you die.
Obviously, the best part of this entire game is the introduction of the character Doey the Dough Man, which, OMG, I love this guy. Doey, like a lot of characters in the series, is yet another experiment made by Playtime Co., but this time things are a little different. Instead of being a basic living toy made with human materials, he instead was made as a giant sentient blob of Play-Doh that could use his form to morph and shift into any shape he wants, which definitely opened up Mob into having a lot more fun with how this guy was animated. Watching this goober bump around and interact with the environment and characters around us is just so cool to me, and it genuinely makes me smile so much. I love how cartoony he feels, and I feel like his mannerisms were done perfectly to match what kind of character this is. For context, the way Doey is introduced to us in this game is as a brand new ally on our side, who throughout the chapter, even before we meet him officially, consistently confirms that fact and keeps the player safe, helping out the best they can, whether that's distracting enemies or paving the path forward to the safe haven. The safe haven is sort of the hub of this chapter. It's somewhere we can go back to a lot, and it's made very clear this is a very important place story-wise for the game. I mean, it's literally the title of the chapter, so I don't know what you're expecting. The safe haven is this beautiful hideaway populated by many harmless toys who just want to escape from the horrors in the factory walls, and Doey is basically the leader or father figure for them. He sees all of them as family, and he has this fascinating moral obligation to be there for them due to being an experiment that holds quite a bit of power. He wants to protect them rather than just escape and leave them behind, and it's genuinely such a noble character trait for him. But all this kind of gets a bit hindered when we show up, or more specifically, when Poppy shows up. Yada yada yada, we're perfect, yada yada yada, destroy the prototype, yada 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 yada, blow up the factory! Poppy, you good? You see, Poppy believes the best way to kill the prototype and end everything is to blow up the foundation of the factory, and even if that was the best course of action, Doey obviously doesn't want that to happen, because blowing up the foundation would mean burying and killing everyone inside, including his newfound family. Doey genuinely wants to help and actually agrees that the prototype is a problem that needs to be dealt with, but he begs the player to consider the lives that are at stake, and wishes we could come up with some other kind of option. Ultimately though, and if you've already seen what happens, then you already know that things somehow ended up much worse than originally anticipated. You see, while Doey was out busy, protecting his family, Poppy orders us to go plant the bombs anyways, and we do so. But before we can even blow them up ourselves, the prototype manages to relocate those bombs directly to the safe haven, killing all the toys inside.
What? What's going on? I let him away, didn't I? The generator's fine.
Doey obviously is pretty angry about this. Not only do we blatantly go against his wishes and betray his trust, but we didn't even accomplish the one goal we hoped to accomplish with our plan, and that was killing the prototype. Instead, all that happened was senseless slaughter, and our actions would be blamed in Doey's eyes as the reason for his family's undeserved punishment. Fun fact actually about Doey that I should have probably mentioned earlier, but it's commonly believed that his character is made of multiple kids rather than just a standard one used for experiments. But because of this, Doey every once in a while can show a slight change in personality whenever overwhelmed by emotions. Early in the chapter, we do see this a bit every once in a while, though it doesn't really amount to much then. But in this moment, seeing everyone he's tried to protect for so long just gone in a blink of an eye, he snaps, becoming this horrifying mess of dough and arms with each personality trying to fight for control. And Doey, our friend and ally, becomes the final boss of this chapter. And his fight is so fun. Earlier in this chapter, we actually get some foreshadowing for the fight, and it shows us that Doey can actually be hurt by freezing. So what we basically want to do is freeze him while he's under these saws so we can cut him up. The way we do that is by letting him pick up these liquid nitrogen canisters and shooting him with our gun. Do this 3 times and boom, you kill Doey. Just kidding, he shows up one last time, and honestly, I'll just let this scene play out.
You and Poppy! It's all your fault! But kill everyone who hurts me! Rip you! Can't trust anyone! Potential voices lie! You lie! I tried to be better, to be who they needed. Smart enough, not good enough, not... I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Doey was never the typical villain for this chapter. Heck, he wasn't even a villain, like, at all. But due to our actions, he was pushed over his limits, and he had to suffer for it. Everyone in the safe haven could have lived in the end, and the chapter really makes the location grow on the player. They make us love the toys, they make us love what they stand for, and they make us love Doey. There was clearly so much effort put into making him such a lovable character, but despite all that, despite all the comfort and appreciation he gave the player, he too, along with his entire family, met their demise. It's genuinely so sad, and I never expected to be emotional playing a Poppy Playtime game, but it's for that reason alone why I love Doey so much. And that's why I love this chapter so much. So, I guess it's time to decide. Is Poppy Playtime Chapter 4 really any good? Well, yeah. It has its flaws, no doubt. The game could have been more optimized, balanced, and they should have never hyped up as many side characters as they did. But when I take a step back and look at this piece of work as a whole, taking in the good and the bad, I can't help but appreciate its place in the series. Look, I'm still on the fence whether or not this game's better than Chapter 3, and occasionally I do lean to it being a bit of a downgrade. But aspects like the story and writing alone are some of the best in the entire series, and I just can't not respect that. It's obvious that there was so much love and passion put behind this game, and I hope that more people can realize that just as much as I can. This new chapter was great. It had great new characters and great new concepts. It had great new gameplay that shows mobs trying new things. And I really can't wait to see what comes next. Thank you for watching. See ya.